Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to this 56th meeting of the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. We have several substitutes this afternoon. For Ms. Collins, we have Ms. McPherson once again. Welcome. Madame Michaud is standing in. She knows our committee very well because she's participated in other meetings, and she's standing in for Ms. Posey. So welcome once again. We have Ms. Goodridge, who's replacing Mr. Lake, and Mr. McLeod is replacing Mr. Dogood. And we also have Madame May with us. Happy to see you again. So with us today, we have Imperial Oil President, CEO, head of the board, Mr. Brad Corson. We also have with us Senior Vice President Upstream, Mr. Simon Younger, and Manager Environment, Regulatory and Socioeconomic, Helga Shield.
Our committee today, and as you know, we always start with opening statements. And you have 10 minutes for an opening statement before we go to rounds of questions.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, rather. I tabled a motion, and before I read it, I would like to make a verbal request. I know that we only have 3 witnesses today and that we will use the 2 hours for these 3 witnesses. I'm wondering if we could do something after the first hour. The orders for the rounds would be like for the first hour. That way members who have less speaking time can ask more questions because this is a more important committee. I would wonder if this would be up for discussion. So that pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, the committee require that any requests for documentation made to witnesses be compiled with and that a copy be provided no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, May 5th, 2023. It's more of a formality. That way, if requests are made, they really need to be done before a specific date. So I missed a piece because I turned to the clerk, but in this motion, you proposed that we do a first round of 6 minutes after the first hour. Is that in the motion? No, that was just verbal. Yes. So for the written motion, I think it's obvious. Everyone would agree with it. So when we ask for a
Just curious, was this distributed? Just? Okay, so it didn't have the notice of motion, and it's being moved now outside of the speaking order. I'm not sure, is that procedural?
Yeah, it's being moved as a point of order, and it pertains to the subject matter that we're dealing with, so it probably wouldn't even need notice.
So
it wouldn't need. It's dealing with the subject matter at hand. Pardon? Yeah. But it's a very routine motion. Si vous pourriez la répéter.
Could you repeat it, Ms. Michaud? You're asking us to...
If it's the subject matter at hand, it's not a point of order.
Okay. So it's not a point of order per se. Pardon? Can't be moved on a point of order, but Madame Michaud took the floor, I guess. And is that sufficient?
Madame Michaud raised a point of order and then started talking to the subject at hand, so it's out of order.
Okay. I thought we could deal with this in a friendly manner since it's pretty straightforward. Donc, Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, I would ask you simply, when you do ask for additional documentations for them to be delivered, yes, it's just as simple as that. You're making a formal motion?
Unanimously that when we ask for documents, we expect that we'll get the documents at some point.
Yeah, Chair, I don't think there's any issues. I'm just concerned if we start kind of going out of the agreed framework of committee proceedings, it goes down a path that can lead to...
Okay, just a second. OK, alors Madame Michaud,
Ms. Michaud, I don't think there are any objections, but it's not really a point of order, so I would ask you to table your motion when you do have your speaking time soon. Thank you.
sans plus tarder,
So, without any further ado,
pour votre 10 minutes.
you have 10 minutes, Mr. Corson.
Well, good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. My name is Brad Corson. I am the Chairman, President, and CEO of Imperial. Joining me are Simon Younger, Senior Vice President of Imperial's Upstream Operations, and Helga Shield, Imperial's Environment, Regulatory, and Socioeconomic Manager. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today in Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. In this meeting today, and every day that we carry out our business, we do so on the traditional territories of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations. We are all entrusted to care for the land, and that is a responsibility Imperial takes very seriously. We come today fully committed to our reconciliation journey. I am deeply apologetic for what has happened at Curl. We are committed to correcting this situation and ensuring it does not happen again. Imperial strives to build strong and lasting relationships with Indigenous communities based on mutual trust, respect, and shared prosperity. We have broken this trust with these incidents, and by failing in our commitment to provide sufficient communications to neighboring Indigenous communities. This communication breakdown has led to a significant amount of misinformation which contributed to fear, confusion, and anger in these communities. I deeply regret that this has happened. The process of rebuilding trust will take time, and it will require listening and learning. All of us at Imperial have dedicated ourselves to this important journey. A core principle of Imperial's business is to operate in an environmentally responsible manner. We work tirelessly to do the right thing, and this situation is not reflective of how we operate and who we are as a company. We are disappointed in this recent performance. We can and will do better. I promise you that. The two incidents being discussed today were a failure to deliver superior environmental performance. This is our first environmental protection order at Curl, which is one too many, and we want it to be our last. I, alongside all Canadians, expect Imperial to meet or exceed the environmental protection standards set by provincial and federal regulators. I would like to reassure Canadians that we are working diligently to address these issues with the urgency they deserve. I will now outline what happened and the steps Imperial is taking to clean up, act, and communicate following the incidents at Curl. We have provided a map of our operation to aid the committee in understanding the scope of the two incidents. The first incident is related to seepage from the Curl tailings containment system in 4 isolated areas near our lease boundary and covering a total area of about 1 hectare. Last May, we discovered pools of discolored water. We proceeded to inform the Alberta Energy Regulator and local Indigenous communities. Discolored surface water can be naturally occurring in this region, and we shared with communities that we were investigating the source of this water. Our investigation was complex and required multiple months of technical studies. Ultimately, we determined that this discolored surface water was made up of natural groundwater and precipitation with some water that seeped from our operations. And throughout the investigation, we also determined there were no impacts to fish populations in nearby river systems or risks to drinking water for local communities. The Curl facility has an advanced seepage interception system which is designed to capture anticipated seepage from the tailings pond into subsurface groundwater. This is a regulatory requirement. Our investigations determined the 4 surface pools resulted from seepage which occurred in shallower layers not captured by this system. We completed all regulatory notifications and we followed our established process with the indigenous communities for initial notification. However, our communication with indigenous communities fell short. We did not speak directly with the leaders, and we did not provide regular updates. I'm sorry for that. During subsequent meetings with community environment committees, we stated the matter was still being investigated. We didn't want to go back to the communities until we fully understood the situation and had a finalized plan. However, we should have provided the indigenous communities with the same information we were giving the AER regarding the findings and planned mitigation measures. We recognize this was a mistake, and we have corrected it. Addressing this situation was and is a priority for our company. There are over 200 people working on remediation efforts, which includes expanding our seepage interception system with additional drainage structures, pumping wells, permanent fencing to protect wildlife, and increased water wells and wildlife monitoring. Regarding the second event, which is unrelated, earlier this year there was an overflow from a drainage pond at Curl, resulting in the release of 5,300 cubic meters of water. This pond collects water from surface water drainage systems and the seepage interception system. As is standard policy, local indigenous communities and the Alberta Energy Regulator were informed of this release after it was detected. An environmental protection order was issued shortly thereafter. We profoundly regret this incident. It never should have happened. The water that overflowed quickly froze. All impacted snow and ice in the area was removed, and Imperial continues to work with the AER on cleanup certification. Water from the overflow did not enter any rivers, the closest being the Firebag River, which is approximately 2.5 kilometers away. Monitoring continues to show there have been no impacts to local drinking water sources, and there is no indication of impact to wildlife. The overflow was caused by a combination of equipment problems and process failures. As a result, we are implementing measures on site to prevent an event like this from happening again. I would like to reiterate that at Imperial, safety and protecting the environment are core values. That includes protecting our people, local communities, and the environment. Curl has a robust water monitoring program. We first started testing in the region in 2008, years before we began production. Recent tests continue to show drinking water in the region is safe. However, we understand this situation has contributed to a lack of trust, and communities continue to worry about their own safety and that of their families, friends, and neighbors. We want communities to feel safe and to know that they are heard. Over the last 3 months, we have met with leaders, environmental staff, and hosted in-community open house meetings. I have personally met with several chiefs and presidents to hear their concerns and to better understand their expectations of Imperial. We have invited all communities to visit Curl to see our remediation efforts and to perform their own water sampling and monitoring. and the majority have done so. In addition, we responded immediately to community requests for drinking water for emergency backup purposes. We recognize that the traditional lands on which we operate provides water, food, and medicine for First Nations and Métis communities in the region. We have heard their concerns, and we are very sorry. I would like to conclude by expressing my sincere apologies again and on behalf of Imperial and all of our employees for the 2 incidents that occurred and the related communication shortfalls. We must and we will do better. I can assure you we are committed to restoring the trust that we have broken. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today, and we look forward to your questions.
We'll go to the first round, the 6-minute round, and I believe it's Ms. Goodridge who's leading off. No?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that testimony. It was nice to hear the land acknowledgement at the beginning. I do want to bring to the attention of everyone here, when you guys went up to Fort Chipewyan and did a community town hall nearly a month after, you did not do that. And you did not start with a prayer, and you did not acknowledge the elders, and that created a lot more frustration in my community, in the entire region. And I hope profoundly that you have learned a lesson that going up for a 1-hour town hall and not starting with a land acknowledgement, not starting with a prayer is not how we do things in northeastern Alberta. That is not how we do things. And so I hope that that is a step towards doing things a little differently. I was born and raised in the Fort McMurray area. I've lived there just about my entire life. My family has been very involved in oil sands development for 3 generations now, and I'm raising the 4th generation. This is home. And it was very concerning because there was no information. There was weeks where there was just a vacuum of information. I was up in Fort Chipewyan as part of doing my duties as a member of Parliament on March 1st and February 28th. At that point in time, I had elders telling me, we don't know what's going on, but don't drink the water. I'm like, that was the level of fear going on. And there was no water there. So I'm wondering if you can give us some information as to when you provided the community with water and when you provided the community and the leadership in the community with information surrounding the breaches.
Yes, thank you for that question. And first, I want to comment on the land acknowledgement reference that you made. That was a significant oversight on our part, and I am disturbed that we did not do that at the beginning of the meeting. I will tell you that it is common practice for us as a company to routinely offer land acknowledgements at our meetings. And I don't know the circumstances of that particular day, but it was wrong. We should have offered a land acknowledgement. We have discussed that internally. We recognize that that was a mistake, and we have raised very clear expectations on the importance of recognizing the land, the important relations that we have with the Indigenous communities in all of our operations and all of our offices. So, again, I'm apologetic for that, and I expect we will do better in the future. With regard to the water issue itself, again, as we have undertook a very rigorous testing process to understand the extent of this issue at Curl, all of our sampling has confirmed there has not been any impact to the drinking water supplies. However, to the point you made, the vacuum in information, the lack of us providing updates created a lot of uncertainty in the communities.
Not to interrupt, I'm sorry. It didn't just create uncertainty, it created fear. Like, the fear was real, it was palpable. I was up there, people were afraid. And I didn't have any more information for them. The municipality was doing their best, they didn't have any information. And I think it is just worth highlighting the fact that this is real. And it's not just uncertainty, this was fear.
Yeah, fear was going to be my next word, uncertainty and fear. And it's horrible that happened. I feel very sad that happened. I place a high priority, a high value on those relationships. And, you know, all of us as individuals, as human beings, none of us want to be in a situation that we are fearful for things as basic as water. And so as soon as that became aware to me and the management team, our organization, that there was fear in the community, we immediately authorized to provide drinking water. Again, despite the fact that we had data that said the water was fine to drink, but that didn't matter, right? It was all about fear.
I appreciate that, but the community didn't have the same information that you had, and therefore it is kind of a moot point. I'm going to move on. We heard some pretty damning testimony surrounding the communication and when different First Nations got communication, and it seemed that there was not consistency as to when certain First Nations versus Métis versus different Indigenous communities heard from Imperial and how they heard from Imperial. So I'm just wondering if you would be comfortable tabling with committee the communications that you had so that we can see when the communications happened.
Yes,
we're over time, but please answer that question, Mr. Corson, and then we'll go to Mr. Wilder.
yes, we do have an extensive log of all of the notifications, engagements that we had with the Indigenous communities. We did make initial notifications, I believe, on May 19th. That was through our established processes with each of the communities and protocols to notify their environment committee. But as I said earlier, those communications fell short because they were not escalated to the leader.
But I think what if I understood correctly, Ms. Goodrich wanted to see some documents of proof of communications and
Yes.
so on. Mr. Weiler.
And we're happy to provide those.
Perfect, thanks.
We did bring those today, and I'm happy to table them.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also want to thank the witnesses for coming to speak here today and answer the many questions that we have in a process here that we know has lost a lot of trust. My first question I'd like to ask is, the Alberta Energy Regulator maintains that in events like this, where there's these persistent seepages, that it's the duty of the owner of the operation to inform the public. And I'm wondering if you would agree with that statement.
Well, certainly, we want to be transparent with all of our stakeholders for our operations. And, you know, we endeavored to provide the appropriate communications, especially as we have gathered more information. We've been making those available to all the communities. We've been providing regular updates, not just to the AER, but we've been posting those updates on our website so that information is available to everyone in the public.
Thank you. And given that Imperial is known as of the seepage taking place since at least May of last year, is there an estimate in how much of the water has actually seeped since then?
We are still in the process of calculating the volumetric estimates, but what I can tell you is that for the 4 seepage locations, the footprint, if you will, is about 1 hectare. And the reason there's a lot of complexity in the calculation is because it's more than calculating just the fluids that are on the surface. It also involves estimating the flow of water and fluids subsurface, and that's a much more complex process. It's very transient and variable, in nature, and so we're doing extensive modeling. But again, what I can tell you today is that the footprint was about 1 hectare.
Thank you. Well, of course, it would be great to have that information, given that this has been going on for at least, or almost a year at this point. And we know that that Imperial's met many times with the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, as well as the Mikisew Cree, since the events took place in May of last year. Why did Imperial not notify either nation of the leakage of industrial wastewater when they're downstream in the watershed? And of course, they're drinking the water and eating the food that depends on the water.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We care deeply about the relations with our Indigenous communities, both the First Nations, the Métis, the communities you referred to. We did make initial notifications to those communities right from the outset. Where we fell short and where we are improving our processes is those notifications were only to the environment committees for those communities. Those notifications did not include the chiefs and the senior leadership of the community. That was a mistake on our part. Given the situation and the significance of the concern, we absolutely should have picked up the phone and spoken directly with the chiefs and the leadership. So we've corrected our process to ensure that that does not happen again. Since then, as I mentioned in my statement, I have met with several of the chiefs and the presidents.
Thank you. And if you think, if in this case the downstream community was a city like Calgary, do you think you would have notified the city?
We would have followed the same process. It has nothing to do with what city is downstream, what community is downstream. We certainly feel an obligation to keep all of our stakeholders, all of our neighboring communities aware and notified. And as I said at the very beginning of the incidents, we did make a notification, but we failed in escalating that within those communities. And then we also failed in providing regular updates as time went on and we gathered more information about the incident. We provided that information to the AER, but we should have, in parallel, provided it to the Indigenous communities. And we will do that in the future. We're doing that on a regular basis now.
Thank you. And you mentioned that your testing shows that there was no impact to wildlife, fish, or drinking water. However, your own investigation that was shared with the Alberta Energy Regulator in August of 2022 found samples of contamination that exceeded the environmental guidelines for things like iron, arsenic, hydrocarbons, and sulfites. And the Alberta Energy Regulator mentioned that hydrocarbons and naphthenic acids were found in a fish-bearing lake. And we know that nations have taken pictures of wildlife tracks that are leading into the lease area. And that given that environmental groups have been, or rather Indigenous groups, have been kept entirely in the dark of the impacts that you found, why should local communities, Indigenous groups, or Canadians writ large have any faith in your assessment that there's no impact to wildlife, fish, or drinking water?
The information that we've gathered right from the beginning confirms that there has been no adverse impacts. There have been some excursions in the data, but often that can be attributed to variations in background levels. But we are committed to gathering extensive data and ensuring that that situation is accurate and we continue to not have an impact on fish populations or wildlife. We have employed contractors that are partly Indigenous owned to perform assessments in the area of the seepage, both from a wildlife impact standpoint, vegetation impact, and then separately water monitoring. And those results continue to support the statements that I made.
Si, alors on se tourne vers Madame Michaud.
Now we go to Ms. Michaud. Thank you very much, Chair. Before we start the time, you didn't answer my question whether we could have two separate panels have similar speaking times as the first panel. Personally, I would keep to the motion that the committee adopted at the beginning of the session. In my opinion, after the second round and third round, we will look at 5 minutes and then 2.5 minutes. But it's up to the committee if it agrees, if there's no proposals. I see on the Conservative side, they're saying no. On the Liberal side, there doesn't seem to be interest in that. So I will keep to the normal format. Unfortunately, that's the decision. Thank you. As it is my time to speak, I will take advantage of this to table the motion that I tried to do so earlier. But it was my error to try to do it earlier as a point of order, as Ms. Goodridge said. I hope the Conservatives will agree with this motion. It was distributed to members of the committee that pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee required that any requests for documentation made to witnesses be compiled with and that a copy be provided no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, May 5th, 2023. Congratulations, your motion was adopted. So 6 minutes, they start now. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming today. Perhaps you heard it earlier. I am standing in for my colleague who is the critic for the environment. So this issue is very important to my party, and it's an issue that interests me also personally. What's happening in Alberta is very concerning. So I thank you for coming today to give explanations. People are feeling the impacts of these events, and they deserve explanations. And Mr. Corson, I heard in your speech that there were many, you made an apology, and there is a desire to do better next time. Above all, you seem to be blaming a lack of communication, and perhaps you're not taking responsibility enough for the events. And I'm wondering that you consider that your company has a legal and moral responsibility to the communities that are feeling the impacts of this technical irresponsibility. Perhaps you could tell us simply, yes or no, do you believe that you have a moral obligation, a legal obligation as well? And if so, what agreements or internal documents prove this? Do you have agreements with various communities, not only to bear this responsibility, but also responsibility to inform them when there are incidents like what happened recently in recent months?
Thank you for the question and your comments. And first, I would acknowledge your statement that people deserve an explanation of this situation. And that's why I'm happy to be here today, because I want to share our understanding of the situation, our plans as we go forward, and our apology, of course, right from the outset, but especially our commitment to learn from this, to do better, and ensure it doesn't happen again. We do take responsibility for the notification process. I am deeply saddened and apologetic that we did not fulfill the moral obligations that we have with these very important Indigenous communities. We have spent decades building relations with these Indigenous communities, and it's horrible that we have shattered the trust with them, and we want to do everything we can to rebuild it. We have agreements with each of the neighboring communities around communication protocols, ongoing engagements, consultations, and as I mentioned earlier, although we made some initial notifications, we fell short in the spirit of those agreements and those expectations. And that's what we're working hard to rebuild, and we're committed to it.
Je vous remercie pour la réponse.
Thank you very much for your answer. I would imagine that you suspected that it would make your relationship with the communities rather difficult if you didn't communicate directly with the chiefs, this must have crossed your mind. So my question is simple. How come you just didn't give them the information when it was the right time to do so?
Well, we certainly are giving them the information now. We fell short for the period while we were still investigating the situation. We wanted to have a more definitive plan. We were gathering data. There was nothing concerning in that data per se, but we were fully analyzing the situation. And so it was always our intent, once we fully understood the situation, the source of the seepage, we understood and had approval from the AER around the mitigation plans. Our intent was to share that whole story, that whole process with the communities. We should have walked them through the learning process as we were gathering data, and that data validated that there was no damage or threat to the water supplies or the fish populations or the wildlife. We should have been sharing that, but we didn't. That was a big mistake, and we've learned from that mistake. We've corrected our processes, and I'm confident that this situation will never happen again.
I hope that sincerely. You said in your opening remarks that your investigation allowed you to determine that there were no impacts on the wildlife and fish and the drinking water in local communities. But Ms. Goodridge properly described the feeling of fear that there was and that there is still in these communities with respect to water consumption, tap water. And Chief Alan Adams also said, we're just asking our members to throw out the game meat that they have. They wouldn't even give it to dogs. That's what they said to CBC Radio-Canada. They were furious to learn that what they harvested could have been contaminated. So how can you state with certainty that there were no impacts, adverse effects on the environment? Do you have samples? Did your investigation allow you to determine with 100% certainty that there was no risk for humans? We've gone over time. A quick answer in 5 or 10 seconds, please. We cannot get to the real heart of the question, but at least try to allow you to answer another question from someone else. 10 seconds.
Yes, we've continued to do analyses on the area. We've hired third parties to come in and perform independent analyses, and they continue to conclude that there is no risk or minimal risk to any wildlife impacts.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, please. No, sorry, Madam, Ms. McPherson.
Yeah, over there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you very much for being here today, for providing this testimony for us, and thank you for apologizing. That is certainly important to do. But I have to tell you, as an Albertan, as a member of Parliament, as someone who sat and listened to the testimony of Chief Adams, I'm angry. I'm angry at Imperial Oil. I'm angry at the provincial government. I'm angry at the federal government, and I'm angry at the AER, because you all failed that community. You know, what you're saying to me, sir, is that you're saying that there were no adverse impacts. We've all described to you some of the adverse impacts. There certainly were. And you have lost the trust to be able to say that we should trust anything you bring forward. You've broken the trust that you have with those communities. So you'll forgive all of us in this room for treating all of your testimony with a great degree of skepticism. Because I have to ask you, for example, you met with Athabasca Fort Chipewyan First Nations at the Environment Management Committee 3 times last summer and fall. You met with them on July 21st, September 15th, and November 18th. And the toxic seepage was never brought up. So you talk about the fact that on May 19th you let them know. On May 19th, you said there was discolored water. discolored water and vegetation. You never said that that was tailings, that that was toxic sludge that was come up. And then you had an opportunity 3 times to bring this up. Even to think that you had worries about it, that you had concerns about it. You didn't bring it up at all. Can you explain why on 3 occasions, meeting with an environmental management committee, your company failed to even raise it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And again, our communication processes did fail in that regard. When we made the initial notifications of discolored water, it was unclear what the source of that discolored water was. We know in the Athabasca watershed region that discolored orange water, which is representative of high levels of iron, is naturally occurring. And so we needed to perform more investigation. And that's what we communicated initially to those environment committees. It took...
You said you were going to follow up with them, but you never did follow up with them. You know, even during their annual tailings management review sessions, Indigenous communities pointed out evidence suggesting that the tailings ponds in questions were seeping beyond its seepage interception system as early as 2020. As recently as November 2022, Indigenous representatives asked for an update. November 2022, if you didn't have the information 6 months in, sir, if you didn't have any inclination that there may be a concern there 6 months in, I will find that very difficult to believe. And at the time, you failed to mention that there was any lateral seepage occurring from the tailings ponds or notice of noncompliance that you had received from the AER in September. You were clearly trying to hide information from Indigenous communities. Isn't that true?
No, it's not. We have never been trying to hide any information. We were negligent in not sharing information proactively that we had, but we've never been trying to hide any information. I do understand that we have lost a lot of trust, and I recognize that creates skepticism for what we say, including today. But I would just ask that you let our actions going forward, you let the data that we provide going forward determine the results of this situation. And we have made conscious decisions to change our processes, our communication, and to be very transparent with all of the data that's available. And we're going to continue to do that as we go forward. I cannot change what's happened in the past. It was wrong, and I'm very apologetic for it. I'm not happy with it. But I can change what we do going forward, and that's what we are doing.
So, sir, this is a lot of questions about how you communicated with Indigenous and Métis groups. Obviously, very, very important. But I think we also have some questions about the environmental disaster that is ongoing. I mean, it is not just communicating that something terrible is happening, it's dealing with the terrible thing that has happened, of course. So, you know, regarding the statement that you made about the discolored water pooled up to the surface at 4 locations, but that doesn't address the extent of the leak below ground. What are the concentrations of contaminants that are in the below ground leak, not just the water that made it up to the surface?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about kind of the actions we're taking, because we are taking significant actions to address the subsurface seepage. We have, over the last few months, drilled 140 wells that will allow us to both monitor across that whole area what the water quality is. We have drilled wells as part of that 140 that allow us to pump the water out of those subsurface layers and recycle it back into our process. We've installed
So I'm going to run out of time. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I did ask what the concentration of contaminants was in the subsurface water.
Well, we've taken over 1,000 samples over the last several months. And so, you know, that's an extensive amount of data. I don't have all those specific data points.
You don't know
available.
how much concentration of contaminants are in the underwater seepage?
We have provided all that information on our website. We provided it to the communities. We provided it to the AER. And if there's a desire, we can provide it to
There's a
this
desire.
committee as well.
We'll go
I just
now
don't
to-
have it available to me right now.
We'll go to
Thank
Mr.
you.
McLean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and Thank you for being here. There is one piece of information that we've heard before, and you've said it again, Mr. Corson, about the information that you provided at the initial seepage. You said you gave it to the environmental committees of the Indigenous organizations. We heard from the Indigenous organizations that were here on Monday that said it was only a rumor they'd received. Will you have in your documentation the actual communication you provided to those environmental committees of those Indigenous organizations?
We can certainly provide documentation of those notifications if there's a desire to receive that.
Thank you. I think I'm going to concentrate my questions on Ms. Shield now, because this does look like a failure of process and communication. It looks like it's in her responsibility, is what looks like her job here. 3 months from the time in May 2022 when this initial seepage came out, and then till August, until your chemistry was actually showing that this was industrial water. That's 3 months when people were reticent about their own water. Do you think a better communication plan could have been had, making sure that people were informed on a daily basis about your testing of the water that they bathe in and that they drink?
If I could go back in time, we would do things very differently. We would do them as we're doing now. You know, since the Environmental Protection Order was issued to us in February, we've had over 300 contacts with those communities. We've shared over 50 reports. We're logging all those calls. We have shared all the information that has gone to the AER, both in summary report and in the data spreadsheets themselves. We're providing, every time we give notice to government, the same time it goes to those Indigenous communities. So I think that will become our new normal.
So it wasn't the normal till now to give people assurances that the water they use on a daily basis is safe when you have an industrial spill. Is this what you're telling me?
Well, I think we had no indication that there was a concern with the drinking water, and that's really what drove the decisions.
Well, there's an industrial seepage, which has the possibility of getting into people's water. Do you think the course should have been to make sure that that was not, number one, testing enough to make sure it did not get into people's water, and giving them the assurances that when they have a shower, when they bathe their children, when they drink their water or cook with their water, that it's safe water?
Absolutely. Anytime we have some activity that may have an impact off our site or may have an impact on local communities, I agree we should be sharing that information.
Okay,
And
I
we
hope
will do
this, hope something comes out of this that actually has a responsibility accountability mechanism going forward. But I want to concentrate in my next set of questions on your relationship with the Alberta Energy Regulator, because it looks like you, from the timeline we have, it looks like you notified them about this spill in March. And it looks as though all they did was put it on their website for other people to get that information from their website. There's no direct contact from what we've seen with the Indigenous organizations about the spill, not the seepage, the spill. So obviously an event happened here that is beyond what ever should have happened, and yet nobody reached out and told people there's something going on very serious here. Neither you nor the AER. How do you think that should have happened?
Well, I think when the notification went to the AER, there was a reach out to the environmental staff of the communities. We started offering leader-to-leader meetings very shortly thereafter. After the first week, we shared the initial response plans that had been submitted to the AER. Within a week, we began weekly updates to communities. On Wednesday, we issued our 10th. So those go out every Wednesday afternoon.
Okay, just thank you. I have one final question here, only a few minutes, and I need it answered. The issue around intergovernmental responsibility here, because the government of Northwest Territories was expecting an indication from the government of Alberta when such an incident happened, and it received none of that. The Alberta government apparently didn't know about this, even from the Alberta Energy Regulator, a quasi-judicial body, until the same time that the federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, received notice. Is there no reporting mechanism that makes sure all these governmental bodies are informed when an incident like this happens?
We report to what is called the EDGE hotline. It's a 1-800 number. It's open 24/7. And the expectation is when we call to EDGE that the fan-out process starts at that point.
We're out of time, so we'll go now to Ms. Thompson.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. I think, obviously this is very difficult conversation to have, and I can tell you on Monday, the testimony we heard was incredibly disturbing. It wasn't, certainly it was communication, but it's every aspect of people's lives, and the fear was very difficult to witness. It was, and I want to really stress the impact of the mental health impact on the witnesses who were here, and I can only imagine, probably can't imagine what it's like in families and in community. So I want very clearly to say that this is certainly communication, but it's much more than that. It's environmental, it's people's lives. As an organization, what are you planning to do now to help mitigate what's happening in people's lives? And I'm going to use the word compensate because it supports now, whether it's mental health, business. There were other very, very real concerns around cancers and other health concerns. As a company, how do you plan to address that within the communities?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. These are real concerns. I agree with your statement. I watched the testimony on Monday myself, all 2 hours and 40 minutes of it. I was deeply troubled and saddened by the stories I heard. It pains me deeply to experience what we're all going through together, the impacts that we've had on these very important Indigenous communities. They are our neighbors. They've entrusted their land to us, and we have a responsibility. So I feel horrible with what's happened. We are working very hard to rebuild that trust, and that's why, as Helga mentioned, and I mentioned, we've had several ongoing engagements with them. We want to work with each of those committees or communities to make this situation right. We want to help rebuild trust. We know that there are mental health impacts. We know there are other concerns, and we want to engage them community by community to fully understand what those issues are, what we can do to make things better so that we can rebuild trust, so we can go forward as strong partners in this relationship. It will take time, but we are committed to it.
So to that end, I just want to go back to drinking water because I think the environmental reality is incredibly important for this conversation. So certainly, I believe April 15th, 2023, the samples provided, but clearly there must have been a series of water samples that you received. I didn't hear on Monday that any of the witnesses that were present had those records in hand. Were they provided, and do you have a log of the water samples, both the subsurface layers and drinking water? Because the environmental impact needs to be addressed as well, and I think that needs to be a very tangible conversation. So I'm wondering about the data and the records and how often those reports came to your desk and where they are, so communities particularly can see them, and I think it's important for this committee.
And we have provided an extensive amount of data to the communities. Admittedly, more recently, not early on in the process. But I might ask Helga to talk very specifically about the nature of the reports we're providing, the frequency, because there are many reports.
Yeah, as I said, we did bring a log, so happy to share that with the committee. We have released or shared all that water information with those communities. We have spoken
Excuse me for a
with,
second, but what are the timelines? Is it just the April 2023, or do you have the data over the past number of months?
oh no, we've provided the data over the past number of months as well as several years prior, so they can see background information as well. We are working with communities, providing capacity to support them being able to undertake technical reviews of that. And if I could, I just wanted to step back to an earlier piece of your question. We've been talking a lot about Indigenous communities and the company. Working in this space, over 1,100 of our workers at Imperial are Indigenous.
Okay, parfait. Alors, on se tourne vers...
Perfect. Now we go to Ms. Michaud. 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Corson, I noticed in your opening remarks that you spoke about water as if it was uncontaminated, but in the chemical analyses that were submitted by the EER in August of 2022, samples showed that there were concentrations of some chemicals that exceeded the thresholds that were recommended. And we're talking about arsenic, hydrocarbons, sulfate, other chemicals. Do you agree that in this case you should call things as they are and not and talk about potentially toxic substances and not just talk about water?
Well, we're attempting to be very transparent with all the data that we find. Relative to those specific tests, we acknowledge that there are tests in the area of the seep locations that have exceedances relative to established guidelines. When I talk about no harm to drinking water or the river systems, I'm talking about separate samples that have been taken at the Firebag River, at the Athabasca River, that on an ongoing basis show no deviation from normal baseline for those water bodies. We do have situations where there are exceedances much closer to where the seeps occurred, but not where there's actual water systems, river systems. And so that's the clarification.
Merci. Thank you. I'd like to go back to the analyses that were done. Does the AER receive regular samples, or did it and receive them in 2022 and April of 2023?
Yes, we've provided extensive data to the AER. Again, I might defer to Helga to comment more specifically on the nature of those reports, the frequency of the reports.
Yes, certainly any water sampling data that was provided to the AER has now been provided to communities, all of it.
Thank you. Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is drainage pond 4 still leaking into off-lease lands?
No, it's not. We have cleaned it up. At the time that overflow incident happened, that water froze almost immediately. And so we have cleaned all that up. We're waiting on the AER to confirm the final certification that the cleanup is complete based on the soil samples we've taken. But that is not leaking.
And are toxic tailing fluids still being pumped into the leaking reservoirs as we speak?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question. Could you restate it?
Are toxic tailings still being pumped into the reservoirs that have been leaking?
The tailings ponds that we use are designed with recognition that some level of seepage could and can occur. And as a result, we have installed right from the beginning.
Are you
an
still using
extensive-
them, though? You are still putting tailings into those ponds?
Yes, we are. It's
Okay.
an integral part of our operation. But as I mentioned earlier, we've expanded that seepage interception system to address the seepage that we've identified.
So are you trying to say that there is some level of seepage that is acceptable and that that is still happening?
There is recognition that seepage can occur on an ongoing basis, but we have designed a system that has wells around the perimeter of the tailings ponds that will collect that seepage
Well,
before it
should.
leaves our lease.
I think we can all agree that it should contain it before it leaves the lease. That didn't happen. You initially estimated the overflow spill at 2,000 liters. You then revised that number to 5.3 million liters. Is that number of 5.3 million liters accurate, or did more toxic tailings still spill from that? Is that still an increasing number?
No, we believe that's an accurate number. The source of the.
Accurate as to the day or accurate as to today? Is it, as of today, 5.3 million is accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason it was 2 to begin with, we didn't estimate it at 2. The reporting guidelines require us to report something that is 2 or greater. So when we made an initial notification, it was in recognition that we had a spill that was 2 or greater. It got registered as 2 in the system, but we knew right from the outset that we had to go through a quantification exercise.
Okay.
And that's why you see it as 5,300.
Thank you. Mr.
3
Kirk.
million, 5.3 million.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for coming to the committee. And as has been mentioned by everyone today, some concerns and certainly the need to see trust restored. So my question, Mr. Corson, is what is being done? Since certainly we heard, and from what I understand, you and your organization has heard that trust has been broken, damaged, and needs to be restored. So what are you doing? What work are you doing to ensure that trust gets restored?
Well, certainly trust is much more than words and statements, right? You know, trust is defined by actions. And so we are very much focused on actions with all of our Indigenous communities. We have made significant adjustments in our communication protocols. We're being very transparent, providing regular updates to the communities. We are meeting with members of those communities, both across, their organization at all levels, including at my level. But we're also going into the communities and offering, if you will, town halls, open houses. Similarly, we've invited all the communities to come to Curl so they can see the incidents firsthand. They can see the mitigation steps we're taking. We've offered for them to take their own water samples in order to, help them build confidence if that's what it takes. And I think through all those actions and a further demonstration of our commitment to this relationship, we hope we will rebuild trust. But trust is something, again, it takes a long time to build. I use the analogy of, a very intricate crystal piece of artwork that could take hours and days and weeks and months to build it. But then, in one misstep, you drop it and it shatters. And then it takes, days and months and years to rebuild. That's where we are. We dropped it, it shattered, and now we're going to invest all the time, the commitment that it takes to rebuild it. This is critically important to us as an organization.
Thank you. Now, No, I do want to dig down, and you referenced it here, and you referenced it in your opening remarks, just about the testing and ensuring that there is accountability and understanding, because we hear certainly, and as a member of Parliament that represents a ton of energy production, mostly in traditional oil and gas, but there's a ton of misinformation that comes out about the industry in general. However, I do want to really dig down on the testing. You mentioned just a moment ago that you're allowing Indigenous communities, local stakeholders to do water testing. You'd mentioned in your opening remarks that you have contracts with Indigenous organizations that are doing that testing. Can you dig down into some of the specifics as to what that looks like? You mentioned, I think, 140 wells where you're able to pump out water to both test and mitigate some of the challenges here. So can you dig into exactly what that looks like and whether or not communities in the area can trust that there is not contamination that is affecting their health?
Yeah, we added 140 wells, so now we have approximately 350 wells. Of those 350, I think it's about 55 are specifically designed to pump water out from the subsurface. So as seepage occurs and it approaches those particular wells that are intended to protect and ensure that groundwater that's affected by seepage does not leave our lease, those 55 wells pump it back into our system for processing. The balance of those wells, just shy of 300, are used to monitor. And so we have a very rigorous process to go collect data from each of those wells on a very regular basis. I can ask Helga to comment on the frequency. I believe some are monthly, some are quarterly, but I'll...
Well, we're a bit over time, but we'll go to Mr. Longfield, and you can always provide the answer in response to someone else. Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the representatives from Imperial for being here, and also for following the testimony on Monday, which was incredibly powerful testimony, particularly relating to the health issues. And in fact, Chief Adam having a father-in-law that's currently being diagnosed with a rare cancer, the impacts on those communities, both from a physical health, but also a mental health. On Monday also, Minister Guilbeault has proposed a joint federal provincial Indigenous working group with participation from the oil companies to be established, and not to replace the existing Crown Indigenous working group on the potential oil sands mining effluent regulations, which continue their important work. Could you maybe comment on the importance or whether you would see this as a positive move to get everybody at the table? Chief Adam started his testimony by saying, we're done with all the pointing of fingers. We need to solve the problem together.
Yes, I haven't seen all the details of what Minister Guilbeault has proposed, but the concept of, bringing stakeholders together, both government regulators as well as the Indigenous communities as well as the industry to work together to improve the communication process, to improve the management of tailings for this industry, I think is a positive. And,
okay.
I would support, participating in such an undertaking.
Great, thank you very much. And beyond communicating, we do have the existing physical locations of tailings ponds. You have 27 operations in Alberta and the Northwest Territories. The process improvements on Curl, is that something that's going to be happening simultaneously with the other operations so that we do include the Indigenous people? We heard in our testimony Monday that the Indigenous people weren't allowed on site during water testing. Now we're hearing that they are.
They certainly have been invited on site, and many of them have participated. Imperial participates in several industry organizations, industry networks. so that we can share the learnings of this particular incident. We have one tailings pond that is, of the subject here. I'm not familiar with the details of all of them in industry, but again, we are participating in several mechanisms to share the learnings. And I might ask Simon Younger, who is kind of closer to those details, if he wants to make some comments.
Actually, if I could, I appreciate that, and if he could do it in writing would be helpful. I've only got a few minutes left, and you mentioned other sites like the Sydney spill in Nova Scotia with 600,000 liters spilled. It's not just Alberta, but it's also, as you said, an industry concern. To that end, I'm wondering about the actual cleanup of the water using new technologies. The University of Guelph is working on nanoparticles and aeration systems. There's other work done around electrodes. And how are you integrating the research from the universities into cleaning up the water that's in the tailing ponds right now?
Technology plays a very important role here for our industry. Imperial established the first research organization for this industry several decades ago. And for us as a company, over the last 20 years, we've spent roughly $2 billion on research. And so that continues to be a high priority for us. We also were a founding member of COSIA, an industry organization that focuses on research and technology developments with an extreme focus on tailings. And so we are actively involved in the pursuit of better approaches to manage these tailing ponds.
Is there anything happening now? Can you see some progress? Is there any example that you can give us?
Well, I don't know if I have any very specific examples given the time we have. These are complex matters, but we are continuing to look at, additional ways to treat the water, additional ways to manage the water, and that process continues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go back to Mr. McLean now for 5 minutes. Okay. I see. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No worries. Thank you, and thanks again. I just want to clarify, in the original request I had regarding communications, you'd said logs, and then I believe Mr. McLean had asked for the actual testimony. I'd like the content of the communication so that we can just see that. I also want to ensure that it also includes with the local municipality, and while Fort Chipewyan is a predominantly Indigenous community, there are non-Indigenous people that live in that area, as well as it's the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo that is the one that operates the water treatment plant. They're the ones that operate a lot of those pieces, and I think that if that isn't included, I just want to ensure that we're also including that, because that's important for me. So can you confirm that that's part of?
Yes, we had extensive engagements with the municipality. Ultimately, they have declared the drinking water is safe, and so we're happy to share with you the engagements we've had with them.
That would be great. And I guess one of the big questions that's kind of still in the community, especially in response to the town hall that didn't really go well, and that's being very polite. There are still a lot of questions and a lot of people that want to share their concerns and their fears and their thoughts. Is there a willingness on the part of Imperial to go back to Fort Chipewyan to have a more fulsome town hall, and not just limit it to an hour, but stay until people have had their piece?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, we obviously learned a lot in that town hall. We went there, both to share information, but to also listen, to understand concerns. And understandably, there was a lot of anger expressed. And it goes back to what you and others have raised, is a lot of fear, a lot of lack of trust, things that are very personal to them and to the community. And so it was a very difficult, town hall, but we are very committed to continuing those engagements, some of which maybe there's already, plans for those. I might ask Helga, who's coordinating that for us, to comment.
Yeah, we've put forward a proposed schedule to each of the 7 communities in the last week or two, but we will want to work with them to understand what would work best for them.
Can you list which 7 communities?
Sure. Yeah, so in Fort Chipewyan, it's Athabasca Chip, Mikisew, the Métis group, the First Nation and the Métis group out of Fort McKay, and the First Nation and the Métis group out of Fort McMurray.
And not 468 in...
That was 468 in 1935, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And will there be a general town hall and engagement in the city of Fort McMurray for non-Indigenous people that also, shocker, do traditional harvesting and hunt and fish in those same sort of lands?
Yeah, I think our goal is to work with communities and understand what forums work best for them. So we've put forward a proposal. We're seeking feedback on what forum works the best, and we'll go forward from there.
Okay, if there's one piece of advice I could possibly give you is don't let perfect be the enemy of good,
Sure.
and sooner rather than later is probably going to serve you in the long term.
Thank you.
And I think that that's possibly one of the biggest lessons learned in all of this is that there was such a vacuum of information. It led rumors, it led to an immense amount of fear, and that fear went far beyond just the borders of these communities. This has rippled into other communities. There are ACFN members and Mikisew members that live all across the country that were fearful and scared for their family members. There were people all across my area that who make their living in this industry and are proud of the work that this industry has done. And they were questioning what they've been doing because for the first time in a long time, they were really let down. And it's nice to hear you here saying sorry, and it would be nice to see you in all the different communities doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's
So we'll tack it on the next time, I guess. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Imperial for presenting today. I certainly appreciate hearing you. My name is Michael McLeod. I'm the MP for the Northwest Territories, and I'm from the region called the Decho. I belong to the Decho First Nations. I'm Métis. We're recognized as the Big River people. Decho means Big River in the Aboriginal language. And we've always had concerns of what is going on upstream from the time the first logging operation started in farms and everything else that puts stuff in the waterways because we're downstream from it. And I appreciate hearing you talk about being concerned and also saying that people deserve an explanation. But for years and years, the North has not had input into what's going on in the Alberta regulatory system, as you probably know. And now with what's happening with the leaks from the tailing ponds, people are very concerned. And I'm hearing lots of comments, calls. And as you said, we need to restore the trust. And I think you know just as well as I do that Indigenous people do not trust governments, any level of government, and certainly don't trust oil companies. So if we're going to make any headway in moving forward, I think the actions are going to determine how we rebuild the trust. And there's many things that have to happen. But because we can't get any information, and Imperial has not reached out into the Northwest Territories, I think that's going to be difficult. Yeah. I grew up on the Mackenzie River or the Dead Show. I swam in the river, I drank water from the river, I hunted on that river, and I'm very concerned, as every community down the Mackenzie Valley is. So I want to ask you, my first question is, if Imperial Oil would support having a meeting in the Northwest Territories to talk about your operations, to talk about your future plan, talk about this breach, talk about a cleanup, and if they would provide the financial support to have that happen. That's my first question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And, you know, we have great respect for the people of the Northwest Territory. And, you know, it's unfortunate that that information hasn't been made available to you. As I've said, we want to be very transparent with what we've learned from this incident, the ongoing data that we're gathering, and our plans to correct it as we go forward. And so we would be happy to engage with you in making that information available. And I take your guidance as to what's the best way to do that. And if there is a desire to have a meeting, we would entertain that.
Thank you, and I appreciate that answer. I think there's a number of things that we really have to look at how, in order to move forward. First is some of the short-term actions, such as this. I think the minister has made some good decisions about a working group. We certainly can't, as you indicated, can't change what happened in the past. But I sit here and I listen to people talking about how they've done their part. And everybody seems to be, in a way, kind of passing it off to somebody else, whether it's communication, whether it's testing, whether it's research. And that seems to be the norm when it comes to dealing with what's happening in Alberta and how things are being treated. You know, I worry a lot about cumulative effects because everything that goes in the water, whether it's in BC or Alberta, come right past my doorstep. And now that the minister is looking at this, and you've indicated that you support it and you think it's positive and you're willing to do more, would you be willing to participate in a cumulative effects study if that was something that came about?
Briefly, please, because we're over time.
Yes, certainly we're happy to participate in a study. You know, anything that can improve the understanding and build confidence in our communities regarding the impacts of our industry, you know, I think is a positive thing. Yep. We support participating.
Perfect. Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Chair. Chief Adams said last Monday, and I'll quote him, even after 2 months of reporting, we still don't know really what happened. In my opinion, no one was fired, no disciplinary measures or sanctions were imposed either by this company or the government. End of quote. That's what we have noticed. You said, Mr. Carson, in your opening remarks that you felt that you were somewhat responsible with respect to protecting the environment. And when we know that oil and gas extraction, production and consumption, all risk of leaks, all of these have sizable risks for the environment. Do you think that oil and gas regulations should be stricter? You mentioned, like all Canadians, you said, we exceed environmental standards established by federal and provincial regulators. Do you agree to have tighter regulations and for Imperial Oil to respect these standards? Are they rather to be responsible when there are leaks like the ones we have seen?
Yeah, a couple comments I would make. I mean, first of all, we have great respect for both the federal and the provincial regulators. We certainly endeavor to follow all regulations and not just to meet those standards, but to exceed those standards. In terms of whether we have the right level of regulation, I think that's a question for the federal regulators and the provincial regulators to make an assessment. What I would say is that I have spent nearly 40 years in this industry, and I've worked all around the globe. And my experience is that Canada has some of the strictest regulations that I've experienced anywhere in the world. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be better, and we should continue to endeavor to make them better, make them the best they can be. But I want to just provide that perspective that we have a very strong foundation here.
Madam McPherson.
Thank you. Ms. McPherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses again for the testimony. Mr. Corson, you said at the beginning of your testimony that you're disappointed in your performance. You're disappointed in the performance of Imperial Oil. We know that Imperial Oil lists safety, and this is a direct quote, safety, health, and environmental performance first in its list of business performance measures that it considers when determining compensation. Imperial Oil has said that it delivered, and I quote again, strong safety performance and effective enterprise risk management, and demonstrated clear commitment to sustainability in 2022. That was part of how it was determined that you would be able to double your salary, as reported in the Globe and Mail just recently today, that in 2022, your salary doubled to $17.34 million annually. Do you feel that your performance actually met the standard of demonstrated clear commitment to sustainability? Do you feel that your performance delivered strong safety performance and effective enterprise risk management?
Well, first, I haven't seen the article you referred to, but with respect to those principles and those values, those are the guiding principles for our company. We consistently strive to perform at the highest level of safety and environmental performance. That is core to who we are as a company. This particular incident is a big disappointment for us, and we are learning from it. We're going to improve as we go forward. I think there's many examples of positive things we've done as we've established kind of the best.
To listen to the positive examples. I think we're all here very much because of the negative examples. So I would suggest that if you were to ask any of the First Nations and Métis communities that have been impacted by the Curl spill, they may suggest that $17.3 million a year is inappropriate for the performance that you've provided for Imperial Oil. I have one other question for you. You knew that the location of this particular tailings pond was prone to seepage. The berm is constructed of porous materials. There are at least 4 seeps and the evidence of seepage being detected beyond the seepage interception system. Given these problems and that the future incidents are possible, if not likely, do you believe that this is still a safe structure?
Briefly, please, Mr. Corson.
Yes, I do believe it is a safe structure. We have built the tailings pond to all of the appropriate construction standards. We have installed all of these wells, as I mentioned, and we will be monitoring the data from those on an ongoing basis. So we have confidence in this structure.
Is it Mr. McLean or yeah? Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question that I didn't fully understand from my last round of questioning. The initial seepage was discovered on 19th May 2022, and you weren't aware of the chemistry until August 16, 2022. What takes so long to understand the composition of your industrial water that's been released through seepage? And it's open to anybody that can give me a technical answer.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll ask Simon to comment on that.
Yeah, happy to provide a bit more information there. Thanks, Brad. Really, to give you a bit more of a sense of the timeline and how we investigated the seepage incident after the first discovery of the discoloured water in the main
Quickly, please,
timeframe.
Mr. Younger. Just
Yeah.
what takes 3 months to?
Well, as an example, one of the things that we had to do was undertake a geochemistry study. We had to drill a series of monitoring wells. The geochemistry study took about 5 months. We drilled a series of monitoring wells. We really had, that was all directed at identifying the source and
I've
the
only got so much
pathway.
time here, Mr. Younger, so I'm asking a direct question. Testing water, what took 3 months to determine what this water was made of?
Well, as I just explained, it's a very complex question of source and pathway, and understanding the geochemistry of what we were measuring from the monitoring wells.
Let me move on, please. The issue I'm having here, as far as responsibility of communication to everybody, the public, the obviously Indigenous bands that were there. I've got a muddle right now, and I'm getting different responses from this panel than I got from the panel that presented earlier this week, and I imagine I might get different responses from the panel that presents next week. But what I want to know is, out of this muddle, we're going to have to come up with a communication clarity that shows that there's confidence in this system going forward, that you can continue to operate without people having, literally looking over their shoulders about whether their water is safe or not. I know that part of what we're looking at here is a mix-up between governments or between parts of government, as in Alberta's case. The government of Alberta didn't find out about this until the government of Canada found out about this. The AER wasn't reporting, it seems, to the Alberta government on time. So there does seem to be a lack of communication ability. Ms. Shield, you talked about this edge, that your responsibility was to put it to edge. Do you know if there's a communication standard from there about where it goes as far as the various other government bodies are concerned about? Because I'm telling you, something here failed.
I'm sorry, I can't speak to how the regulator runs EDGE.
You can't say what happens. And the EDGE is the government of Alberta body that doesn't report up to the Minister of the Environment of Alberta?
I'm sorry, I just can't speak
Okay.
for government.
Okay, so thank you. Do you think, given the fact that there's a muddle here between the regulator, who's a quasi-judicial body at Alberta, who doesn't communicate regularly with the government of Alberta, the government of Alberta, that introducing another government body into this is going to clear up the muddle any bit, or is it just going to make it more of a buck-passing exercise going forward?
Well, I think whichever way we go forward, it's going to be critical that we are very clear on what those communication paths are and who's responsible for what.
Okay, yeah, we're looking for clear lines of communication responsibility for people's safety here going forward, obviously. Thank you very much, and I will pass the rest of my time to my next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to be giving some of my time to Ms. May as well. I did want to start, though, with the testimony that you heard on Monday as well, and thank you for coming and for your apologies. But I don't think right now the way that the First Nation, the Métis Nation people are feeling that apologies are enough. And so I'm wondering what specific actions you're going to be taking. You know, we say that, you know, we can't go back and fix what's happened in the past, but we can certainly change processes moving forward. And one of the things that became very clear in the testimony on Monday, which you heard as well, was that these chiefs and the representatives of the Métis Nations did not feel included, have not felt included or at the table all along. I'm sure you heard them talking about the duty to consult and how it's been passed down from one to another and another. And I think this lack of involvement was exemplified by the fact that this investigation went on for so long, and despite the relationship you spent years to build, they weren't involved. So, you know, I just find it very hard to sit here and to say that, you know, we can go back to the way things were, because I don't think this is, although the regulators are at fault, it's not only that, it's the fact that these First Nations, these Métis people, are not sufficiently involved in these decisions and in these processes. So how will you change that?
Well, I agree with you completely. We cannot revert to, you know, how we operated with our communications and our engagements as we go forward. We have to improve on that, and we're committed to that. And so we have already expanded our communication processes with each of the communities. But as we've talked, that trust is critical to us. It's going to take a long time to rebuild that trust. But so we are taking actions of extensive communications and learning.
But
and
more than
listening.
communications, I want to know more than communications, because I think the process has to be changed to include the First Nation, the Métis representatives of these communities as you're going along, rather than deciding whether you're going to solve. It seems like the conversations between the regulators in Alberta and yourselves, and not with the people whose land it is. So how concretely will they be more involved, not just communicating to them, but can you change the process in some way so they feel more part of what is happening and at the table making these decisions?
Well, I think it does tie back to these community benefit agreements that we've established with each of the communities, which outline, not just communication protocols, but regular engagement protocols. And we're going further, as we have, to build capacity in those communities, to help them establish companies, provide services that get them fully engaged in our operations.
Okay, I appreciate that and the agreements, but obviously the trust, that those agreements have been broken by what happened and the lack of communication. So I would just suggest that I feel that more than just what's in those existing agreements and the communications that have been used in the past, that there has to be a more fundamental relook at how First Nations are consulted, how the duty to consult, how they are involved in the process as these decisions are being made, including with the water. But I would like to pass my time now to Ms. May, who had a question as well.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
About a minute and 15 seconds.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Leah Taylor-Roy. Look, Mr. Corson, I'm going to try to put to you, given how short my time is, some facts, and then ask you a question. Since you've stated that Imperial Oil has a commitment and it has a principle, I think you used that word, you used the word of the core principle of Imperial Oil's respect for the environment. I put to you that Imperial Oil and its parent company Exxon were some of the most prominent companies in the fossil fuel sector, denying that climate change was a problem. Your predecessor, Robert Peterson, CEO till 2002, continued to say carbon dioxide was good for the environment. We've known since 2006 that Indigenous peoples living near your operations and the whole oil sands sector have had elevated levels of rare and fatal cancers. We've known that since 2006. And since 2008, the first published scientific papers that the toxic materials from the tailings ponds were getting into the Athabasca River. So this is not new information. The corporate record of your company is one, and of your industry, is one that doesn't reflect any kind of principle of respect for the environment or human health. Chief Takaro here Monday, and you heard him say it, said the sector, and I suppose the regulator as well, has put profits ahead of people. So I just have one question. How do you sleep at night? That's a question.
It's a question, but I'm not expecting an expansive answer because we're well over time. But maybe, I don't know, Mr. Corson, take 10 seconds to answer that.
Well, Mr. Chair, I mean, I take these situations very seriously. We have work to do here. I am committed to ensuring this sort of incident does not happen again. I want to improve our trust with these communities. And more broadly, I am proud of what the company is doing as it relates more broadly to the impacts of climate change. We are a founding member of the Pathways for Net Zero Alliance in the oil sands. And we're going to continue that endeavor to support Canada's commitment to net zero by 2050.
You can give some of your new salary to Greenpeace.
We're going into the last round. In order to land on time, I'm going to reduce everyone's time by 25% proportionately. So is Ms. Goodrich? Mr. Couric for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair.
An extra minute also, Mr. Chair.
I'll do it this time, but I'm not going to be in the habit of banking people's time. It's a little too complicated for somebody like me to handle. So go ahead, Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions that I'm going to try and get to, but just to clarify so that we're crystal clear, the communities in which that were affected, has there been an impact on the quality of their drinking water related to what happened at Curl? Just so that question can be clearly answered. So, Mr. Carson, no. And just to be clear as well, there's been extensive testing to ensure that has been the case.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that I know it's been talked about in somewhat of a roundabout way. Just want to make sure that that was very clear. Mr. Corson, I mentioned before the area that I represent. You know, it's several hundred kilometers south of where these areas are. But the impact benefit agreements that are signed with many First Nations and Métis groups in the area, they were referenced in the meeting on Monday. There's not much detail in terms of what was provided, and I think there's some reasons for that. Sometimes are those Métis versus First Nations that are under Section 35 of the Constitution. I'm just curious if you can outline a little bit about the engagement with First Nations and ensuring that there are benefits to them and their people and the individuals that are in the area in terms of what happens with development with regards to Imperial Oil.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm going to ask Helga to respond to that because she is directly involved in establishing those benefit agreements.
Well, I can't speak to the content of the agreements themselves because they are confidential business arrangements. If you looked at the ESTIMA reporting, which we do to government, you would see that these communities, collectively the 7, in terms of fees and things that are associated with these agreements, that totals about $16 million a year.
So, sorry,
16.
$16 million.
I think what's probably more important is collectively businesses that are associated with these 7 communities in the year earned revenues of over $500 million from the Curl operation. In fact, as a company, we do about $761 million last year of goods and services with Indigenous communities.
So, if I can ask a few more details on that, because I know I have some companies in my constituency that do work up in the Fort Mac area, and some of which have Indigenous employees, Indigenous ownership. So I'm just curious as to so you're talking about $500 million in contracts to companies that are directly related with the 7 communities that we've been talking about here today, just to clarify that is in fact the case.
That's correct.
Okay. So in terms of engagement of how the processes to come to those agreements, I'm just curious because there's been some questions that have been asked, rightfully so, around engagement related to a problem. So I'm just curious if you can expand on how these communities can trust that the engagement when it comes to these benefit agreements was the process to which that was undertaken.
Briefly, please.
These agreements were negotiated a number of years ago when the Curl mine was being started. At that time, they are really meant to codify the way we work together, the way we engage, the way we consult. They set a structure for how we meet, how often we meet, the content of those meetings. So it includes environment, discussions, consultation, business development.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Weiler for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just move into it here. Can you confirm to this committee that there was no communication with the Alberta government beyond the independent Alberta Energy Regulator regarding the seepage prior to the environmental protection order?
I don't have that information directly. I know we fulfilled all of our required reporting obligations with the Alberta government. I guess I would have to defer to my colleagues here if there's knowledge about anything specific to the Alberta government beyond the regulator. I'm not sure.
I'm not aware of any.
Thank you. During the review process for the Curl Mine, it was recognized, and we talked about it today, that there's a higher permeability in the proposed area for the external tailings area, and that the seepage could impact surface waters. And the joint panel also noted that if unmitigated, the seepage will likely impact surface water bodies to the north, such as the Firebag River, which makes the drainage control systems or overflow systems very critical. An article that was published by CBC News in April of 2019 reported that Imperial is using, quotes, an older type of leak detection system that is not as sensitive as the newer, higher definition models. And Imperial has confirmed that seepage occurred in shallower layers that are not protected by the detection system. So I was hoping you could explain what types of tools, if any, you're currently required to use to prevent the release of toxic chemicals into the broader environment.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll ask Simon to talk about the additional measures we put in place since we learned that there was this seepage at a shallower level.
Yeah, first of all, just as to the questions of design, you're absolutely right. Seepage was anticipated in the design of our curl tailing system. That's industry standard. We have a seepage interception system. That's exactly what it's there and installed to do, and that concept is proven, and that's conventional technology that we have employed. The question around monitoring, the way we're doing that is through monitoring wells and measuring and detecting the seepage, and that it was always intended that the seepage interception system would evolve and adapt as the monitoring dictated. What we've done, I think it's been mentioned a couple of times now, we've installed over 140 new monitoring and interception wells. We now have pumping at all of the 4 isolated locations where we detected the seepage. So the seepage is now being mitigated, and we've installed over 400 metres of trenching to also help intercept the seepage. But these are very industry standard and proven technologies that we're employing.
Thank you. And in your reporting to this, you mentioned that there was both like a mechanical failure as well as a process failure that took place here. And so my question is, how often is the external tailings area checked by staff?
Yeah, I'll let Simon continue with the discussion. What that refers to, though, is the drainage pond overflow incident, and maybe describe that.
Yeah, so the failures that you describe relate to the drainage pond that overflowed, and I want to be absolutely crystal clear. I made the same comment recently. That overflow should never have occurred. That was our mistake. We have learned from that error, and we've made adjustments at the drainage pond in question and also our other drainage ponds.
And sir, sorry, my time's running out. How often is it checked?
Is the question how often is that area surveillance undertaken? Routinely, regularly, every shift, multiple times a day.
Okay, thanks. Madame Michaud pour 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes, Madame Michaud. Thank you, Chair. I will give my time to Ms. May.
Merci.
2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Michaud.
Ask you any rhetorical questions. I think that you approached this evidence today with the impression that you had a communications problem. Are you prepared to say quite clearly publicly that the problem is a pollution problem? Communications issues are quite secondary to the pollution problem. Do you agree?
What I would say is we not only had a communications problem with these 2 incidents, we had some operational problems, and we've been addressing those now through some design enhancements and equipment enhancements, as well as procedural enhancements.
I want to return to a question my colleague, MP McPherson, asked you, and we didn't get an answer, and I think there could be a range of answers. I've looked on your website, by the way. You said we could find the concentration of chemical contaminants below ground on your website. Certainly, if it's there, it's not easy to find, but I want to ask now of any of the witnesses from Imperial, what are the concentrations of toxic contaminants below ground now? You can use a range for arsenic, for naphthenic acids, for polyaromatic hydrocarbons. We know it exceeded guidelines. What would be the range of what you found in recent water sampling for those 3 substances?
I don't have those details available to me, but we're happy to make them available to this committee.
Thank you. That would be, I think that's probably all my time.
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds.
Statement or
Okay,
comment?
well, then in that case, I'd also like to know when you plan to consider that it's a poor idea to continue pumping toxic effluents into a tailings pond that you know is leaking.
We believe our operation is sound. We've made some design changes, and we are confident that that system is appropriate.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In a joint review process for the Curl Mine, Imperial Oil stated that it was, quote, confident that it would be able to achieve the reclamation timelines and milestones identified in the supplemental information it provided as part of its applications. Are you still confident of that?
Yes, we are. I think that guideline provides 10 years, as I recall, after we cease operation with that particular pit, and we still feel comfortable with that.
And how much money has been allocated for that?
Certainly, we have allocated money, but I don't have that number available.
Would you say it was more or less than $17 million?
I can't comment. I don't know.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a last little question, I guess, to get a little bit more detail with regards to the seepage. So my understanding is that you are speaking about the new interception wells, and that they are not intercepting all of the seepage. I believe, Mr. Younger, you'd spoken about this. They are new, they are working as to standard, but they are not intercepting all the seepage. So seepage into Treaty 8 wetlands is still ongoing then. Is that an accurate statement?
We've had to do a multitude of different things to address the 4 isolated areas of seepage. This has included trenching, so very, very shallow trenching with well points and pumps to collect what the trenches gather. We've installed shallow well point
But the question was, is seepage still going into Treaty 8 wetlands? Is that still ongoing?
Yeah, what I also
So
said
yes, was that a yes?
What I also said was that we now have pumping at all 4 locations, so the seepage is being mitigated at all 4 locations.
So there is no seepage, or is the seepage still ongoing in Treaty 8 wetlands?
We've now intercepted all the seepage, and what I would say is our monitoring, extensive monitoring, now needs to prove that to us.
Thank you.
So you can't confirm that because you still have not completed the monitoring, is that correct?
No, the monitoring is ongoing and continuous, and now that as this moves forward, we'll want to confirm that that remains the case.
Thank you.
Monsieur Deltel.
Mr. Deltel. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Carson, thank you, and others, thank you very much for your testimony today. The fact that we have the big boss of Imperial Oil here today shows the importance that this company gives to this strategy, and also the importance of this major issue that your company is generating. You really recognized your responsibilities and you apologized. It's a step in the right direction. You probably heard a few days ago the testimony of the Indigenous chief who came here. It was very touching. Why? Because he was the first victim of this situation. The fact that you came here to answer our questions from parliamentarians is a step in the right direction. And you know more than anyone else that to rebuild and the credibility and trust that people will have in you, you will need concrete action. You have to make sure that you're a partner and not just an observer of the situation. And people in Fort McMurray and around suffered from this situation, and therefore I will let my colleague speak who represents these people here in the House.
Gérald, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
So I guess I have some questions because with trust, part of the issue has been where was the accountability? And so I have a question for you guys, and I'm just wondering, I'm hoping you'll be able to answer it. Has there been any internal disciplinary action taken as a direct result of the failures at Curl Lake?
To date has been solely on fixing and addressing the impact of the seepage and of the drainage overflow, rebuilding trust with the communication processes. We haven't been focused on, internal blame and responsibility. We are conducting our own internal investigations, and we will deal with that appropriately. But the focus has been very much on the external incident that's occurred and making sure that that's our priority to address that.
That's fair, and I appreciate hearing that, and I think that's important to make sure that we're focusing on what happened and how to prevent it. Will at some point there be conversations and space around internal discipline? Because clearly there were multiple internal failures.
Well, certainly there will be conversation. I can't comment or speculate on what the outcome of those conversations will be until we complete all of our internal processes. But those conversations will occur.
And I thank you for that. I guess the last question I have in the remaining time is, are you guys bearing the cost of most of this, of all of this engagement that you're having with the Indigenous communities, with the travel you've said that you've offered to tour them through Curl? Are you covering the cost? Because Curl is not an easy place to get to.
Yeah, I might ask Helga to comment on that, because again, it ties back to, many of our agreements that are in place, and, certainly we want to be supportive of the communities.
Yeah, absolutely. We are covering the cost.
Can you repeat that again, just so that it's on the record?
Yes, we are covering the costs.
Thank you, and merci beaucoup à notre président.
I'd also like to thank our chair.
Parfait. Alors,
Perfect. Mr. McLeod, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question, because I think we can't have Imperial here without talking about the threat that still exists from the tailings ponds. As long as they exist, we're under the threat of leakage, spills, and potentially more serious spills that could happen. And as a person that lived downstream from the Alberta tar sands, I've heard and had the reassurances all my life that this is not going to happen. We've got all the best technology, the best equipment, everything works fine, but here we are. So I really have to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how you're going to address the longer-term reclamation of the tailings ponds that Imperial has. I think that's something that can't go on anymore. We don't have solutions. We have problems, and there's still tailing pond permits being issued. I don't think that should happen. So maybe you could talk about how you plan to do away with all these huge tailings ponds that are existing.
Well, first, with regard to the threat you mentioned, I would just comment that, it is our responsibility to mitigate that risk. And we are working diligently to enhance the design features and the operation to ensure that we are, prudently dealing with any seepage and working to ensure that that does not in any way threaten or endanger the water system, the river systems. In terms of long-term tails management.
Let me interrupt you. It doesn't give me confidence when somebody sitting here that collected, $17 million salary, paid their directors $8 million in bonuses, and nobody got fired over this issue. And you tell me that you're working on it to make it safe. You're reassuring me. You got all this responsibility for all these tailing ponds, I'm asking you, how are you going to make sure that this doesn't end up, how are you going to clean it up? That's what the question is.
Well, in terms of long-term reclamation, we have developed long-term reclamation plans for the tailings ponds. They're the subject of regulatory requirements, and we're obligated to provide updates to those every year. We believe we have a very responsible plan to deal with those tailing ponds at the end of their life so that we can reclaim them and return that land to a natural ecosystem. We have gone to great lengths to actually collect up to 60 plant species so that we can ensure that when it's time to reclaim, time to restore, that we can return it to its natural condition. We have that responsibility, and we're committed to fulfilling it.
Taylor-Roy?
Yes, I just wanted to add, you mentioned that you had invited the communities in the area to come and see the pond. I think it would actually be a great idea, and maybe something we can discuss later, for this committee to go and meet with you there and to see what's going on. Clearly, this is a very, very serious situation, and one where the surrounding Métis and First Nations people have been hugely impacted. And I would just suggest to the committee at another point that we have a conversation about actually coming up to see this firsthand.
Well, we'll let the committee decide, but we would welcome that. Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. As the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, I would like to officially welcome every single one of the members here to come up to Fort McMurray. I would love to take you for a tour and show you my hometown and the amazing industry that supports Canada's economy.
Thank you very much, everyone. We are at the end of our meeting for today. I'd like to underscore that our witnesses did table documents at the beginning of this meeting. Documents, if I'm not mistaken, are about communications around this incident that we are examining. So I'd just like to thank Mr. Corson, Ms. Shield, Mr. Younger for accepting our invitation today to appear, and I wish you a happy return back to Alberta. Thank you very much.